First of all, the collections that wouldn't be given up for love or money.
Also in tonight's programme, we find out why you need a second mortgage these days just to buy a comic. Michael. And now from the past to the future. In the world of comics, anything is possible. I bought this comic for 65p. Tomorrow it could be a collector's item. Some rare editions fetch thousands of pounds, and fanatical collectors will go to any lengths to keep prices up. Where will it all end? With the aid of time travel for Love or Money reports from the next century.
This is Global News, Dateline 2093. Tonight, Mayor declares state of emergency as Southside Warehouse Complex burns. The riot brigade moves in. Many civilians injured, some critical. Police spokesman claims release of rare, stockpiled comics, cause of unrest. Good evening, this is Peggy Dannenbaum. Comic mania has been with us for nearly a century. It started back in the days of the early 1990s, an age when bank vaults held comics, not just diamonds. The first appearance of Superman sold to a stockbroker for $150,000. Global News takes a closer look at this craze.
I have about 5,500 comics. These books are wonderful, and I am giving them the best home that I can, and keeping them in the best condition that I can. It is like a friend. I mean, I'm not getting a little neurotic about this. I mean, I realize this is an inert piece of material, but why do I read these things? Why do they move me? Because they touch me as a person who is close to me would. I worship action art by Jack Kirby, sequential art by Will Eisner, who did a book called The Spirit. I read Donald Duck because it makes me laugh. They're clever. They make me smile. They surprise me. To me, these are very important people in my life. That's why I collect them. And to be honest, I don't really care if anybody else likes them at all.
The investment boom started because people began to think of comics as art. A Golden Age comic of the 1940s, like Spider-Man, was admired for its clear, stylized vision of urban terror. An 80s comic like Lobo for its blood-curdling, sinister violence, spiky artwork, and anarchy. The value of comics just soared. While the value of an average London townhouse between 1979 and 1992 almost trebled, the first comic in which Batman appeared increased over 150-fold. Comics had become big business.
It's a bit like stocks and shares. People buy them cheaply, hoping that the value of the shares will go up. And if they do, they feel great. Of course, there's a downside that they may not. But in the comic world, comics don't really go down in value, so it's a bit more secure.
Scarcity drove the market. At secret locations, comic fans were becoming comic dealers.
I think it'll be a great time to sell now. And I think that if we do it now, we can sell a lot of comics.
Yeah, it's true, because our catalogue itself is about £20,000 worth of stuff.
Exactly, at 30% profit. What does that make?
Well, I don't know, about 6,000. Oh.
Recently, there was a comic that came out at about 80 pence to buy one. Within a few weeks, the price had risen to £6. So obviously, if you'd bought 10 of this comic, you could stand to make a lot of money.
So all we need now is to finish off the catalogue. So
yep.
How long is it going to take?
A few days to type up the titles and put the prices in. A small bit of advertising to let people know that we're there, and we're ready to go.
The art of collecting has changed considerably. People often don't read the comics they buy. In fact, they buy them in pre-shrunk bags, so they won't risk opening them, because as soon as they open them, it's no longer in mint condition. Somebody will have read it. But if you keep it in the bag, you can say it's the absolute top grade. So people buy to sell, not to read.
By the time the Museum of Modern Art in New York brought comics into the mainstream of contemporary art, people began to see a problem. A first edition of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles reached a value of 300 pounds, but it was a fake, a photocopy. Avid collectors of the X-Men felt obliged to buy 5 copies of the same comic. Why? Because the covers were different. And Superman was even killed. Reviving aging product had become the comic world's first priority.
Comic books, obviously printed on newsprint, they fall to pieces very quickly. They've got chemicals built into the paper, they go brown, they go brittle, leave it in the sunshine, all the red disappears. So people have begun to restore them. They've discovered that by using water-based inks, you can touch up the reds and you can maybe do a little bit of gluing to the cover. This is maybe acceptable in fine art, but in comics, it's a no-no.
This is a classic Fantastic Four of 1961. This comic is the same, just a little brighter. But take a closer look, and there's a surprise. The first comic is battered, the second immaculate. It's been ironed. The paper has been bleached, and the original spine stapling replaced with glue. The old comic is worth 300 pounds. The restored edition, 5,000. In a word, a killing.
One wise guy decided that he wanted to have a high-grade Batman 1, but he couldn't actually afford it because Batman 1 now sells for as much as £80,000, whereas low-grade copies, they're a snip at maybe £5,000. So what he did was he got hold of 3 copies of Batman 1 in low grade. One had a bad front cover, another one had a bad back cover, and another one would have brittle interiors. He put all 3 together, and he suddenly had a very high-grade Batman 1.
Believe me, there's no one as hurt as a comic collector who finds out he's been sold a bill of goods. And to think that you don't have the precious item you thought you had can just drive you over the edge.
To exploit the value of their comics, speculators even resorted to terror tactics.
I used to publish a comic called House of Hammer, which would take Dracula and Frankenstein and tell them in comic strip form. Now, the first issue didn't sell particularly well, so I ended up with a garage full of unsold copies, about 15,000 of them. The magazine continued, but the trouble was I'd got 15,000 of number 1, which doesn't really make it terribly scarce. So what I did was I actually had a bonfire in the back garden and burnt about 10,000 of them, so I could sincerely, with my hand on my heart, say, it's quite a rare comic, the first issue.
Years ago, people thought of comics just as for kids, but nowadays it's adults who are in the know about comics and in the know about investment that are going to buy them.
Now the riots are raging out of control. Police think a classic market collapse, this time in comics, is responsible. Join us for a live update at midnight. This was Global News, Dateline, The Future.
Well, that's all we have time for on For Love or Money this week. We'll be back next week at the same time. Until then, goodbye. On next week's For Love or Money, the row raging over the Tower of London's collection of arms and armour. And at the Paris Fashion Week, we ask, should we be collecting costume jewellery?